The Housing Boom and Bust by Thomas Sowell. What happened in the housing market in 2007 and 2008? What were the factors that led up to it? And who is to blame? Thomas Sowell comes in with his very short book of answers that he wrote in 2009, so in the direct aftermath of everything. First of all, I should say I love Thomas Sowell. I think he is just on top of it with the way he writes, the way he reasons, the way he thinks through situations and problems. I've been saying for decades now that when I grow up, I want to be like Thomas Sowell. I just think he's amazing. As of this recording, he's still alive and in his 90s and still writing books, as sharp as ever. In this book, Thomas Sowell says there are many parties contributing to the 2007-2008 housing crisis, but the central idea is that it was governmental agencies pushing home ownership that led to the skyrocketing subprime mortgage crisis. Predatory lending wasn't the cause, it was a symptom of this central drive to increase home ownership in America. Sowell starts the story of governments intervening in housing prices back to the 1970s when zoning regulations come out in various cities. And he uses several cities as examples. Californian cities, a lot of them had these zoning regulations and housing prices went much higher up than, say, Dallas and Houston, which didn't have the same regulation. Then on a national level in the 1990s, it was the thing to have every American own their own home and to make that possible. Race was also a factor in this. You have Janet Reno, who is going after the banks that have suspicious statistical discrepancies between minority and white home loans going out. So this gave banks an incentive to fulfill minority quotas and lower the standards so that they will be able to afford a house that they may or may not be able to pay for. It turns out that being sued for discrimination is really expensive, and so banks have every incentive to avoid that at all costs, even if that means fulfilling some quotas for the loans they give out. So you have all these subprime mortgages going out, and the funny thing is it's kind of a new thing to have in the market, so it's a shot in the dark to value what they're worth and how stable the market is in the first place. You have Moody's and Standard & Poor's saying everything's great, and so that gives a lot of people a false sense of confidence. One of the most staggering parts to me of this book was the details that he gives around Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I kind of knew what they were, but man, it was eye-opening when he talks about how much they're pushing banks to give out these risky loans. And meanwhile, they're being propped up by the people who are profiting from having Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac there in the first place. So some people try to bring up objections to these risky loans that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are dishing out and the Jenga tower that they're building, but the powers that be don't have any interest in having their programs looked after and scrutinized. Like, they're not going to give up the power that they have. Like, there are millions of dollars flowing through these organizations. What's also staggering to me is the lack of accountability faced by politicians. Politicians that said that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were solid and they were great and they were so helpful. And even after everything collapsed in the housing market, they're still insisting that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are the good parts that are riding to the rescue of the failed elements of the market. It's staggering to me that there's no real accountability. You can sense Thomas Sowell's frustration as you're reading this book because you have a situation where the government steps in to help people make housing prices more affordable, and then the housing prices go up. And then they say, well, now we really need to step in to help people afford a house. And then the housing market crashes. And then they say, now we really, really, really need to help people now because now they're really hurting. They lost their house. And it's like they just keep going for broke, literally, on this subject. I can only imagine Thomas Sowell's reaction to Kamala Harris's incentive to first-time home buyers. They get a discount or whatever it is, as if that wouldn't affect the housing prices and the market in general. In Thomas Sowell's other books, he talks about stage one thinking, where you just focus on fixing the problem that's in front of you and you don't think about what that solution leads to. And this book is him like making that case and bringing up the housing market as a perfect example, because politicians are just interested in fixing the thing, sounding good, but it doesn't really fix it. It makes other problems, and then they have further reason to step in. Because when you're a politician, the situation is always urgent. We have to act now. If the situation isn't urgent, then they don't have anything to do. And so things like this are constantly ginned up, like action needs to be taken. but there's very little consideration of the possibility that maybe action doesn't need to be taken. Anyway, that's my interpretation of Thomas Sowell's book. Fascinating opinions. I think he's right on a lot of the points. But I'd be interested if someone knows a good book that argues the opposite of Thomas Sowell on this. I'd be interested to hear it, see how the arguments line up. As for this book itself, I thought it was short and sweet. Got right to the point, made its case, and there it is. Easy to read. I'm going to give it 4.5 stars.